So I'd like to start actually by asking Szczepan Twardoch, in addressing the title of our this evening, "Writing to Change Hearts and Minds." So your book in Germany, which is the Morphine, which I gave to Burton Pike. If you'd like to hold it up, it just arrived. Yeah. So that caused quite a sensation, and what was said in the German press was that you changed Germany's view of what would have happened or what might have happened in Poland in 1939. That there was a very specific view of a certain darkness, a certain glum problematic, which you completely turned over. Would you say that the German reaction to that was right, or what would you feel?
I'm a bit surprised because I don't understand. I don't remember this article so well, but what I remember better is that German critics were surprised that this novel isn't like the Polish novels about Second World War used to be, so that Polish characters aren't, perfectly heroic and so on, and Germans aren't perfectly bad and vicious. So maybe this was the surprise, and I think that novel directions in Poland were more, even more surprised maybe, because some Polish critics, especially right-wing critics, were mad at this book for showing the other history of Polish resistance and so on. But it's not a political novel. It's a novel about a character of mixed identities who just hates history and who wants to live his own dandy life in a occupation Warsaw.
So he's a morphine addict. He's wild. Half German, half Polish, or half German, half Silesian Polish.
He's 1/3 German, 1/3 Silesian, 1/3 Polish, and what is important, he doesn't care about his ethnic identity. His ethnic identity isn't important for him. What is more important for him is his relations to his women.
And this is in 1939 as the bombs fall, and as it's in 1939 as the bombs fall.
Yeah. And he was an officer in Polish military during the September campaign in Poland, and now he's trying to get his life back.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you one quotation from Tagesspiegel. Again, I have everything from my German sources. So one could say Poland does not have a history, only a mythology. In my opinion, most Poles need a kind of psychotherapy in order to come to terms with their past, a thing that is still impossible for them. I hope I'm not being unkind in quoting you saying that. But
well, that's more or less my views about Polish way of thinking about Polish history, and Poles, in my opinion, really lack the real view of its history, because history is the way of building national identity. So the truth is not important. What is important is the myth. And well, I don't like it too much, because I think the truth is a good thing.
So your novel probably changes hearts and minds?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And what I put a great effort to avoid being connected to the one side of a political debate in Poland, because, well, and in fact, both sides of this great political debate in Poland tried to, tide me to their cases, and I didn't let them. I didn't let them because I'm only speaking on behalf of myself, and it's only my voice. I don't belong to a party or a group, or I don't represent nobody. I only represent myself, and well, in Poland you have to fight for that to only represent yourself, not to be, you know, the part of the one of the warring tribes.
Has Kaczynski phoned you?
No, but his secretaries did.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, on that note, actually, I wanted to ask you, Mihkel, unless you want to
What did he offer you? How
Not
much?
Not much, in fact. So.
That's why you are here.
I wanted to ask you one question about Caveman Chronicles. Yeah. So Caveman Chronicles, which came out last year in Adam Cullen's translation. Now, again, I won't say changing hearts and minds again, but let me ask you. It seems to open a window onto a very deep. It gives us a very deep introduction to different lives of people who go to the cave, right, to the spa in Tallinn. And it reaches back 20, 30 years, probably into a time when things were very, very Soviet still in Estonia. So one question that I would have is, your readers in Estonia and our readers here in America, do you feel that you're opening, let's say, a new window onto what was going on at the time?
Perhaps, if one wants to to look into this window, this history, and reporting history is one of writers' main tasks, in my opinion. And what I wanted to describe here was how things change. What was the role of writers at this time, 50 years during the Soviet system, how everything changed all overnight. We were like in a test tube, or the time was frozen. We were there in the times of modernism. We were where you were in 1930s maybe, and suddenly everything melted, and we were there in the open, and we didn't know how to act, how to react, and it was a terrible shock.
The change, in other words.
The change, because we wanted, you know this comparison. Socialism is like a zoo. You are in a cage, but you are fed daily and taken care of. Free world, it's a jungle. You are free, but it's dangerous, and you have to fight your way. We thought that when we are free again, we get the best of the both worlds. Everything that was good from the Soviet time, the social security and welfare, everything will remain, plus we have the freedom. But of course you can't have best of the both worlds. You never can. The book is largely about this shock.
But in fact you can have the worst of the it's also possible.
Well, luckily that doesn't happen either.
Well, one of your novels, The International Man, I think, yes, actually dealt very specifically with that in the sense that the protagonist,
the prototype
is the man who is the first to leave Estonia as
our first president. Yes, I worked in his team at that time.
Oh, so it's, I see. Yeah, I didn't realize that.
I did my stint in foreign politics.
I want to quickly ask you as well that I read on the Estonian literary website that you had a very non-Estonian upbringing because your father was a major translator into English, Oleg Mutt, and that he also was a specialist in Old English and Early English, Middle English, Chaucerian English. So at our library we have all these books. So I was looking at those.
Actually, he was not a translator. He was a professor of English, and he was brought up in the United States because he was the son of a diplomat, and he spent his formative years. He went to English kindergarten in New York, and then he went to Dalton School.
Oh,
Is it
yeah.
still there? Dalton
Dalton?
School. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And so English was his first language. And when he came back, then he wanted to return, of course, with his parents. But then the borders were closed, and he had to do the best with the skills he had. And then he became a teacher of English and then the professor of English. And so you see how history shapes the people's destinies. And of course, I was not allowed to speak English as a child. Otherwise, I wouldn't sit here. I would sit somewhere, I don't know. I would be in your place. I was not allowed because people were afraid. When I was born, Stalin was dead just 1 week. And nobody knew that there will be Khrushchev's thaw or things will open up. People were terribly afraid. And they were afraid when I spoke English, then I would tell stories in school, and well, you know what it meant.
Yeah, well, I wanted to also ask Alta actually about the new Europe, the new Europe maybe that comes across in this amazing issue of Words Without Borders that you edited, that you co-edited, the New Italians, but as Italy as a new nation and a new language, Italian, for non-Italian writers, if I'm saying it right. Because in our experience, in Germany, it's been happening for several generations now that we have writers of Turkish background or Arabic background or Greek background. In Greece now, we're the first generation sort of writing people from Chechnya or from Turkey writing in Greek. So your view was that of Italy. So could you say a thing or two about that?
Sure. So Words Without Borders had invited me to do, guest edit an issue on Italian literature, and the topic that they gave me was migration, and that was basically all they said. And I thought, wow, the possibilities are countless, and I want to portray this. It's a very complex issue, and I immediately, coming from sort of my American perspective, and knowing the Italian writers that get most recognition here in the United States, I naturally wanted to sort of challenge that, put that into question. And also, so, you mentioned that Germany has been dealing with this. I would say France and Germany, yes, and a few other European countries, they invited guest workers in. They stayed a little longer in many cases than was expected, and started writing fascinating things, right? But so the German publishing ecosystem and critics have been looking at this. And I was actually in a conference in Berlin last spring, and one of the literary critics posed this question: is the most pertinent, literary, interesting writing in Germany right now being done by writers who are not of German descent? Maybe born in Germany, but not considered, not historically German. And this, of course, is happening in Italy as well. I think because the publishing culture is a little different, it's taking longer. To keep it back to my issue of Words Without Borders, I had both. I included writers who were born and raised in Italy, including one who grew up under fascism, had been part of the fascist youth, and because that's sort of not really given a choice at that time. And really his poetry, Gian Piero Neri, really looks at this feeling of being in exile in one's own homeland, politically. And his writing really challenges that. So I wanted to get both, what Italians would generally recognize as, okay, this is an Italian writer, plus writers who've just arrived a few years ago. Tahar Lamri, who came from Algeria and worked in France. So I wanted to present a multifaceted picture of because really it gets to the heart of, Szczepan, you mentioned ethnic identity. Mihkel, you talked about language, what the fear that languages induce also. Is speaking a certain language, does it cause fear in your neighbors or fear among your family members or your colleagues? And I think these, with different dynamics, are at work in every single culture. Not just geographically divided or politically divided, but within cultural divisions within a given country. So I think Italy is particularly rich. It's a young country. It was only unified in 1861. So I know a lot of Italians who identify more as Umbrian or Sicilian than they do as Italian. And those divisions, I think, are common to several places in Europe. And then, of course, you get border territories. One of the other writers in the Italian issue of Words Without Borders, she was born in Eastern Germany, escaped as a child to Western Germany, and is now living in Italy and writing in Italian and playing with the language. So,
and you mentioned in your essay, in one of the essays in the piece, that there is resistance among Italian critics. You were kind enough not to mention what critic you were quoting, but you quoted somebody sort of saying they're fanno finto, they're trying, or they're trying to write in Italian and managing maybe to some extent. I mean, so there is that arrogance, if one can call it that, and I guess one should, still extant.
Yeah, so I didn't want to name names, but it's and it's part of, we deal with it to a slighter degree here in America. We have the literary canon. If you study English literature at undergraduate or graduate level, you're presented with certain authors, and then you discover, there are all these there are other people who are writing other things. They may not be canonical literature, but they're writing, and so I want to be careful to not say, I think there are, of course, as populations change, we see it in New York with neighborhoods changing, gentrification, different people moving into the neighborhood. It changes the culture. And one of the primary reactions is fear. There's also curiosity. There's also, are we going to all change together, or are we going to see this as we're losing our identity, we're losing our culture? And these were massive dynamics in our elections here in the US a month ago. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
You are. Actually, I will say I recommend that issue. If you go online to Words Without Borders and type in New Italians, it's a cornucopia of exciting reading, if one can say that.
I will say I was excited, actually. I was a little bit worried about certain things I wrote in my essay. People reacted in a much more positive way than I expected. And they were excited to see these new voices and new names. Some are quite recognized in Italy and have a few books out, others don't. Some have been translated into English, not all of them have. But in general, I think I was worried about calling out, saying Italy is this backwater. In no way is it a backwater. It's always been a crossroads. And there's a lot of interesting writing going on. So,
yeah. Well, so I'd like to ask Szczepan actually in connection to this. So, your novel after morphine is Drach. Drach. And
it's not a Polish word. It's not a Polish word.
What word is it?
It's Silesian.
Silesian. Yeah. So Silesian is. I've also heard that you've said I'm Silesian. I'm not Polish. I don't know if I'm quoting you correctly in that, and that caused a little bit of a storm in Poland. So, again from the German press, which I embraced, I read that Drach's protagonist is the Earth, the Silesian Earth, speaking and narrating over centuries.
Well, it's a simplification, but more or less, yes, that's true. The truth sometimes is simple. There's this great resistance in Poland against the Silesian identity, because Poland after the Second World War. Poland from the multicultural country into the ethnic monoculture, and there is about 500,000 of people who claimed Silesian identity. In Silesia, it's a small region in South Poland with a completely different history than the rest of Poland, because it was the part of Austria and Prussia for the last few hundred years. And Silesian is my more or less first language. It has no written form, it's a vernacular language. And for my parents, they were punished severely for speaking Silesian at schools and so on. So they spoke with me and my sisters in Polish, but I've caught Silesian from my grandparents, with whom I lived for quite some time. It's somewhat similar what you've said about the fear of speaking in English. There was fear. My parents feared that I and my sister will be unable to, I don't know, study and so on if our Polish will show the signs of Silesian. And my Polish still shows the signs of Silesian. I have somewhat Silesian accent, and the people from Poland can say that I'm Silesian, but I'm not trying to hide it. I can hide it when I want to, but I'm not trying to hide it because, I'm not proud of it, because I don't see ethnic identity as a thing, as a reason to be proud, because, I'm proud of things I made, I did, not because of where I was born. But yeah, it is a question in Poland now, and it is a political question. So I have to defend my novel, which is about Silesia, to be seen as a political novel, because it's not a political novel. It's a very personal novel. It comes from the personal experience, from my family stories, and I don't know if it had changed some hearts and minds, but I know it was a consolation for some people, for Silesians who said to me that they're able to find their own family stories in my novel, and that I said in a loud and clear voice the thing we in Silesia used to whisper about only. So that's a good thing for me.
Yeah, actually, I will say I was a bit surprised before we came up here when I mentioned we were talking about minority languages in Europe and First Nation languages in Europe, as we have here in the United States as well. But when I mentioned Aberishta, which is one of the 7 autochthonous languages of Greece, you knew all about it. So can I quickly ask you where you heard about that language, which even in Greece people don't know about?
I read Wikipedia a lot. And, in fact...
Actually, Wikipedia says that there are 120,000 speakers of Aberishta, which I'm like, where are they?
I'm quite interested in small languages and in small ethnicities or ethnoses. And, because I'm a part of one, so it's interesting for me. So I read about it.
Actually, we also look over each other's shoulders, like we look at what the Silesians might do or what the Welsh do in order to see how these languages might survive.
The Catalanian national revival, it's something which which is very popular in Silesia, because Silesians see Catalonia as a success.
There are 5 million of them.
Yeah, of course, and there are only no more than a million of Silesians. So.
Yeah.
And I think maybe 200,000 speakers of the language, not more.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask Mihkel something about Russian as well, because, well, I grew up hoping that I could study one day in Leningrad at the time. And I went there, and then I looked at the university in Kiev, and then I wanted to go to Tallinn, which was difficult. In fact, I didn't manage. But, and this was in 1982 when, I think, was it your first novel that came out at the time?
First novel, right, yes.
Yeah,
82.
1982. And from what I read in World Literature Today, that novel dealt with artists trying to fight social realism.
Well, they didn't fight anything. How could you fight?
Well, I was
Out of
surprised
the
that
question.
in 1982 you could write a novel like that. Was it?
It's the same like being addicted to morphine. It was escapism. It's called.
Uh-huh.
They were not only artists but artistically inclined dropouts and fellow travelers, or what you call them. Well, it had nothing to do with active opposition. It would have been absurd. All opposition was internalized, and people used irony, doublespeak. Irony, as you know, is denial through confirmation. On the face of it, you praise something, hallelujah to Communist Party, but all around you understand that you are taking the mickey out of this party. But you couldn't push it too far, because not all party members, not everybody was quite idiot, and they realized that you are making fun of them, and then you got into troubles. Anyway, irony is always the weapon of the underdog. And so it was in the case of Estonians. I read what you wrote in this, what you sent me, the letter. I was a satirical writer. I've never been a satirical writer. To make satire in a totalitarian system is out of the question.
Actually, I don't think it was me. Yeah, I don't think it was me who wrote that.
Somebody did.
Although I have read that article, yes.
Somebody did. Satire in a totalitarian system, it belongs to the weaponry of those who are in power. You can write satire about work-shy or alcoholics or people with loose morals, or especially those who don't toe the party line. But you can make no satire about the nomenclatura or the party members or those in power. It's impossible. You are sent to prison. But then you have to use irony, or grotesque, for that matter. It's possible too. By the way, Orwell could write his novels because he lived in the free world. Winston Smith wouldn't have been able to write.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So it's not so easy to write about. It's not easy to criticize the system from within, and that's the problem. Why there were so few real dissident writers, because you had to write for the posterity in your drawer, or you had to toe the party, or you had to emigrate. But what's the point of emigrating when there are only 1 million native speakers, Estonians, and they all live in the small patch of land? Then you would write yourself out of literary history, and you don't reach your people anyway. So there's no point in it. And when the turn came in 91, you could have expected that there was a flood of manuscripts, brilliant manuscripts by the dissident writers who now come to the publishing houses and offer their brilliant novels, and nothing. There was nothing, or next to nothing. Only some memoirs that were written during the Soviet time and that couldn't be published. But they were memoirs. No fiction, no novels, no poetry. I mean, that's the bitter truth.
Yeah.
Now I gave you a lecture.
May I ask how your writing has been received here in the States? Have you
Where?
gotten
In the
much?
States?
Yeah.
Well, can you listen the echo of one drop of water into the ocean? That's not. Well, I didn't take America by storm. But I expect with my next. It's called Estonian Circumciser.
That sounds promising.
Well, it has sex and violence, right?
Should we take some questions? I'd like to, if anyone has any questions for our authors. Yes.
I have a question to you about your situation in Estonia. People say, well, okay, with the fall of the Berlin or the Iron Curtain, things have changed radically, etc. Now, for example, and you were saying that there was not this flood of new authors who came out of the from behind the curtain. Now, looking at governments and their policies toward other nations, and for example, the Polish or the Estonian government probably have relations with a place like Cuba. Okay, now, isn't it? How would your works or say resistance works, written during the resistance or about what was actually life like in Estonia during that time? Could you get those published or to an audience in Cuba, for example? And I guess my question is really about, have things really changed, or are we still just sort of, hypocritical about how we view the role of literature in liberating people and changing hearts and minds?
Is it a rhetorical question? Did I get now right that if literature can change?
Yeah.
Let's suppose for one moment, before the presidential elections in the United States, there would have been a couple of good novels about the possible outcome if Trump wins. Would it have made any difference? That's the answer. Would it have made difference or not? I'm not sure it would have been. In place of literature today still is good journalism, and it has the same trouble as good literature. What we do, writers and journalists, we want to turn people's attention to serious issues, and we have to compete with entertainment, and it's an uphill struggle. We can't, and so we have to walk this fine line between winning hearts and minds. Other words, it's how to win people and influence friends, or it was worse. Yes, and not to become. We can't alienate our readers totally if we become too straight-faced and too serious. But if we become court jesters or buffoons, then what's the use of us? But it's very fine line. But how you have to win them, the minds or hearts or other organs for that matter, because the reader, how they say, the reader amused is half converted, right. And that is true. Right. And the humor and irony or grotesque are one of the best tools for this. But you can't teach them, and you can't learn them. It's like charm.
Actually, I wanted to ask Alta a very quick question in between things. As a translator, we as translators maybe work in a very different way. I realized when I look at what you've been doing over the last few years that. Please use the microphone. Oh, I thought I was. I'm sorry. Oh yes, it's stronger now, right? You can hear me. Yeah. The group that you have, Sedilla and Co. Could you tell us a few things about how you work with that? You look for European and for world literature and bring it to authors. How does that work?
Yeah, so the idea is, and I'll try and keep it brief so that we can get other questions in, but so in very few literary translators in the United States are represented by agents. And very few books get published in the United States without agents. And it's very important for me to contextualize this, especially for any Europeans in the audience and especially on stage. Other countries, you go to the average bookstore in Italy, Germany, I don't know about Poland, Estonia, Greece, and you see, at least you see a large percentage, I would say in Italy, easily 40% of the books that you see walking into the average bookstore are translations from other languages. And a lot of them are from American English. And so there's, the United States has been very good, whether, by choice or just by economic forces and other cultural dynamics, at exporting, imposing, however you want to phrase it, our culture on the rest of the world, and the rest of the world gobbles it up, or has, for some time in different areas. And this 3% figure is bandied about a lot, that of all the books published in the United States each year, roughly 3% are originated in another language. And that's not even saying just literature, that's also nonfiction. So we're exporting a lot, we're importing very little. And translators are swimming against that tide. And the idea of Cedilla is basically it's a collective working for the good of the US literary culture. And it's so, right now there are 9 founding members working from all different language pairs. Let's see, can I list all the language pairs? 10 languages, 9 members. Arabic, Chinese, Japanese, Polish, French, Italian, Russian, German, and I think I've covered it. But we're hoping to add more. And the idea is that so a lot of my published the books, the translations that I have published, I've gotten very lucky with the publishers I work with. They're looking at what is happening in the rest of the world. A lot of publishers don't, or they get the catalogs from the cultural institutes in another country that say, here's what we can offer you. Sometimes that's representative of what's being published there, and sometimes it isn't. So the idea of Cedilla is really to help bridge that gap and bring intriguing writing happening in other languages that otherwise wouldn't be able to make it into English. And I think, I have so many questions for my fellow panelists in terms of, how your experience of being translated, and specifically, the themes that you deal with, political, cultural identity, even personal experience. You can take one language and translate that story into English, American English, and we'll get a sense of it. But in a way, translation really is impossible. It's a wonderful task, and it does help connect people. There's still those fundamental differences. Mihkel, your father growing up here in the States, his childhood was quite different from yours, I would bet.
Absolutely.
And so those, it's really the human experience, and bridging those gaps is really what translation does. So.
Oh yes, please.
Do you know what percentage of nonfiction readers there are in various countries? I'd like to compare European countries with the United States, for example.
What percentage of nonfiction, in terms of titles? I don't have any statistics on hand.
Has there been any study done to that in that regard?
I would actually, if I can say, the only studies that have been done is something that Alta has touched upon, which is that we are aware that we could provide you with statistics country by country as to per year what is being translated in general. Because the genres are sometimes difficult to separate, but there are countries where it's 60, 70, 80% of the books are translations, 20% are national literatures. Then, you mentioned 40% in Italy, perhaps. So there are those kinds of statistics. But the other ones sort of lie outside are I'm not even sure that those actually exist. Although,
I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know. It's really hard to, I think, to get solid numbers. And the 3% database from the University of Rochester has done its best. I've looked very closely at it. It's not complete. I'm also part of a small movement called Women in Translation, just looking. So take that 3% coming into English. Of that, roughly 26% are books by women. And
What?
26%
Are.
books written by women. And I guarantee you the countries, the population of the country is not 26%
I asked the
female.
question because of the dumbing down of American readership and the articles lately in the Times about newspaper against online media, and why was Trump elected? And anyway, it's a whole other thing. But I was really curious to know whether Europeans are dumbing down as quickly as Americans are.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a very relative. It's hard to pinpoint what exactly is dumbing down and making more intelligent. You asked also about nonfiction, am I correct? Or did I?
Oh yes,
Did I miss
for
that?
sure.
Yeah, so I know at least, Italy has a long tradition of journalists writing novels, writing literary nonfiction, book-length works alongside writing for newspapers. I think it's starting to disintegrate a little bit. I'm not sure in your countries. I know Germany has the feuilleton. Journalists produce a lot of books, and I think from what I've seen, there's a lot less of that crossover here in the U.S., where a journalist, but again, statistics are hard to.
To see one point, this crossover between journalists and writers. In the Soviet time, there was a clear distinction between a fiction writer was called a writer, and a journalist. There was a huge gap between them, both qualitative and quantitatively. I mean, one was estimated much higher. Mm-hmm. The writer, he was like a hero, and the journalist, he was like a hack or something. But now there is one author that combines both, the writer and the journalist, and that's the way it is everywhere. And what I wanted to say now that this has reached Estonia too. We don't speak so much anymore about writers as something special and who has this divine inspiration. It's more or less professional skills, and journalists do a lot of creative writing. They write all kinds of books. Though it's one big writing only.
I have a question to Mr. Twardoch. I wanted to ask you about the reception of your latest novel, The King, in Poland, and perhaps in more general terms, if the political changes in Poland influenced in any way the way your books are perceived in Poland.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that the political change in Poland changed in any way the reception of my books, because the divisions in Polish literary scene are as clear as it were, because there are right-wing critics and left-wing, and there are, this literary scene in Poland isn't too large. On the other hand, so personal questions are also quite important. So critics which liked me still like me, and the one who didn't like me, they still don't. And and if I would be a filmmaker, I would worry, because the whole movie business in Poland lays upon state money a lot. But to write a book, I only need my computer and my publishing house. And thanks God, people want to read my book, so there will always be a publishing house who would like to publish my books. So the political change in Poland doesn't affect me in any way, and I'm very happy about that. Yeah, that's it, I guess.
I have a follow-up question to Szczepan. I'm from Poland. I know you're quite popular in public culture media. Does it help you to promote your books? And do you think you're changing minds and hearts more because you're kind of a well-known media person? And also, who actually kind of reads mostly your books? Like men, young people, older people, women? What's the...
I don't care about changing minds and hearts too much. I think the only purpose of the novel is the novel itself, and what I want to do is to tell stories. I'm nothing more. For some reason, I have this ability to tell stories which people want to read, to hear, and that's my only goal as a writer. And yes, my public persona helps to sell books. Well,
Don't you agree with me that the world needs new Orwell at the moment?
well, it maybe it does, but it doesn't have to be a writer, because maybe the literature isn't. Let's say 6 years ago, literature was dominating the culture. It was the most important form of the culture, and now it isn't. It's one of a few forms of the culture, but.
But you can't say everything in every field of art. You can't say
You're right.
categorical imperative in music.
Of course.
Well, on that note, I would like to thank you for coming. Thank our panelists and authors, and thank you.